So two of 40k's greatest combatants are going to be fighting in the last book of the Arks of Omen series. Who's going to win? Will it be Lion El'Jonson, Knight of Caliban and Primarch of the Dark Angels, Demon Primarch Angron of the World Eaters? Oh no wait, here comes Ghazghkull with the steel chair. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking about the last book in the Arks of Omen series, and the rather interesting prospect of the Dark Angels and the World Eaters Primarchs being teed up for a big showdown in the lore. In all seriousness, despite all the memes on the internet, I strongly suspect that Ghazghkull Thraka won't be making an appearance, but it certainly would surprise everyone. I guess if Be'lakor can hijack a story though, then why not Ghazghkull? Showing up out of the blue to give Angron a good smashing for allegedly killing Yarrick would be kind of hilarious. As Games Workshop confirmed a few days back, the last instalment in the Arks of Omen series is the Lion. We are getting the return of another Primarch to Warhammer 40k, and basically the first 4 books have all been set up to this. It does kind of feel at this point that the only ones that really matter for the overarching narrative are probably the first one and the last one. The initial book had the setup of Abaddon and Vashtor looking for their key, then we've had Angron breaking things and making one bit of the galaxy a bit more corny, Vashtor trying and failing to get an artifact on the rock betrayed by Be'lakor, and then Farsight defending the enclaves while resisting Khorne, maybe just a little bit feeding into the main narrative there, with a key fragment being found on a Dark Angel ship from the Heresy, and it looks like there's going to be a big Dark Angels focused showdown in the last book. So far we've got a few teasers as to what's going to happen. It does seem that the vast majority of the narratives are only really going to be expanded on in this last one. According to Games Workshop's preview, it's going to be Dante's Blood Angels and Azrael's Dark Angels on one side, pitted against Vashtor, Abaddon and Angron's Chaos Alliance, and hopefully we'll actually learn a little bit about their machinations, as so far all we know about their keys are just some MacGuffins that Chaos Space Marines want to collect. We've got little to no details as to what they actually mean, and I feel like it's kind of hard to be too interested in them until we do. Of course we know that Lion El'Jonson is going to be shown off. We've seen his rather spectacular new miniature unveiled at the Adepticon previews, and perhaps one of the most interesting snippets out of the new lore is that there's going to be some sort of big showdown between the Lion and Angron. They are going to get to duel in the book. It's not really too often that you get 2 Primarch level characters fighting each other and establishing who's stronger. It's kind of an interesting concept in the lore. For that, I thought I'd get your guys' opinions on who should win the fight in the lore, and then a separate poll to see who will win the narrative when Games Workshop writes the story in this book. I do feel like the two are kind of different questions. In terms of our contenders and their strengths and weaknesses within the lore, first up we have the hulking great cornate monstrosity that is Primarch Angron. He's the demon Primarch of the World Eaters, a berserker champion with his butcher's nails that increase his size and strength and aggression, never mind the fact that he's also ascended to Khorne demonhood. In terms of things that could give him an edge in the fight, he is just massively bigger and stronger than the Lion. The Demon Primarchs maybe aren't really playing too fair compared with their loyalist counterparts, who, while they're sort of demigod-like status, the Demon Primarchs are kind of demigod status, but also have a whole load of chaos power infused into them. The Might of Chaos did allow Horus to go toe-to-toe with the Emperor, despite him being vastly superior in might to the Primarchs. Angron basically is an ultimate melee threat. His whole thing is being a melee Primarch, and is the actual Primarch of the Blood God Khorne. And Khorne's a bit of a simple soul. He doesn't really go in for tricks and subtlety. All he has is raw strength and melee might, so you'd expect this guy to be one of the very best in the galaxy at that. He's also theoretically got an extra 10,000 years odd more fighting experience compared with the Lion, who's been in stasis for a long time. He wasn't actually active that long in the galactic history. In theory, he should be the more experienced fighter. His wings could allow him to evade or get the first strike on him, and if he dies he's also cast into the warp, getting to return to reality really quite quickly compared with most demons. Having a casual dash of immortality isn't exactly the worst thing. In terms of weaknesses, lacking subtlety probably wouldn't help him too much. Cornate Radiant Immortality probably means he's not likely to play things particularly smart, just go directly for the melee kill as fast as possible, and not try and worry too much about any plans that the opponents might have to try and stop him. In the other corner we have Lion El'Jonson. He's the Calibanite Knight of the Dark Angels, and his main thing is being a slayer of monsters and nightmares. Perhaps not the worst backstory to have if you're going up against a demon Primarch. It seems in the 41st millennium he's wielding himself a new power sword called Fealty. Cypher ran off with the Lion Sword and it doesn't look like that's been returned. Kind of interesting that that sort of narrative is played out. I kind of feel like this was the moment that Cypher's narrative was playing up to a bit. Paired with that, he's got the Emperor's Shield, literally the relic of the Emperor himself. Gilliman's got the Emperor's Sword, so it's kind of nice that the brothers are sharing out his stuff nicely. I guess as relics go, it's about as god tier a relic as he can get. I can't imagine that this would be the sort of thing that would let him down if he needs to block Angron's attacks or something. Otherwise, he's just generally famous to be one of the most skilled bladesmen of the Imperium. He fought Leman Russ himself to a standstill at one point, and that definitely establishes him as one of the more fighty Primarchs in melee combat. Perhaps in terms of lore weaknesses, he has been in stasis a very, very long time now. It's not really clear if there'd be any negative effects from that, but I'm sure it wouldn't necessarily help him. At least from his miniature's appearance, he does seem a fair bit older than he was on his Heresy miniature. Hopefully the tender administrations of the Watchers in the Dark have restored him to proper fighting shape after he was injured by Luther in the Heresy. With the lore in mind, I did a couple of channel polls. I thought I'd ask you who should win the fight out of Angron and the Lion, and your results were 23% to Angron, 23% thinking it should be a draw, and 54% thinking that the Lion should win. That does seem to be pretty decisive, to be honest. I guess having superior battlefield tactics plus the lore of being a monster slayer sounds like he might well come out on top. Angron might be relentless and very mighty, but maybe has a bit of a history of not faring so well in duels against the most skilled of the combat Primarchs. However, who should win in theory in the narrative and what Games Workshop will write will probably be slightly different things. As normal with 40k lore, there's probably going to be a fair amount of plot armor involved, and in reality, neither of them are going to realistically outright die in this fight, both from a narrative standpoint and because they've got shiny new miniatures that Games Workshop want to sell, and probably want to sell for really quite a long time to come. I think it just wouldn't really be the most forward-thinking thing to do in the world to release a miniature and then immediately declare them lore dead. That in theory would make everything feel a bit retrospective, so you're only fighting past battles from the miniature. Might not necessarily be the worst thing in the world, but I feel like that's almost certainly going to reflect into a bit of dampened enthusiasm for them, and it just seems a bit unlikely that Games Workshop would ever go down that route. This one does tend to be a bit of an issue in Warhammer 40k whenever actual miniatures are involved. The actual notable miniatures and characters who die in the lore tend to be older miniatures that aren't going to get an update at some point, maybe generally tending to be slightly more peripheral characters that don't have the most enormous following. Perhaps some of the better examples are Colour Sergeant Kell of the Imperial Guard, the original Solar Macarius, Captain Tycho of the Blood Angels who died in Armageddon, and Captain Cortez of the Crimson Fists. It's kind of a little bit telling that some of those are the best known examples. They're fairly peripheral characters at best. Even some major ones that they did kill off did get retcons, say Eldrad Oathrunner, Makari the Grot, Gazor's Banner Waver, though admittedly he might be a new one, and Tau Ethereal Ornvars died, though has been kind of replaced by a hologram. Commissar Yarrick of the Imperial Guard is a fairly recent and interesting one. He's been propaganda reported dead, but realistically Games Workshop have left things open-ended enough, so that if they released a new miniature and said that actually no he is not, he was just lost or something, no one would be enormously surprised. With regards to this fight, I think it means that in reality, the Lion might technically lose the fight, maybe say Azrael was doing against Vashtor, but he won't actually die. Similar to quite a lot of character confrontations in Warhammer 40k, you'd insert a Deus Ex Machina to save one of the combatants who was on the ropes. Either the big bad is called away to fight something else, another force intervenes, or they decide to let them live for some contrived reason or another. I feel like they'd probably have more limited options for this if Angron happened to win, as he's likely to be a guy who's going to be very happy to try and take a brother Primarch's skull. You'd probably have to have some sort of intervention that actually attacks and banishes Angron, even if he does win the 1v1. On the other hand though, due to Angron's law of being able to be banished and come back, he absolutely can lose. If the outcome of the fight was a close fight, but ultimately Angron is defeated, he just goes back to the warp and can try again sometime. Maybe in a similar sort of way, in that lots of 40k characters in the lore can fight and defeat an Avatar of Cain, really quite a big bad threat, but ultimately one of them that can keep on coming back for more. In the book it's maybe not impossible that there could be chance of other characters might die, things a bit more peripheral that aren't going to get a miniature update, or there might be some sort of major change to the setting. This is an equivalent series to the Fall of Cadia after all, and that did have some events that unfolded of galactic proportions. I feel like you'd hope that at least something would change a bit after all the fighting. It would just seem a little bit of a cheap and meaningless narrative if just everything went back to the status quo after all, except with Mr. Lion awake again. With the difference between narrative and Games Workshop's writing in mind, I asked you who will win the fight in the book, and it's kind of interesting to see the differences between the previous poll and this one. For this one, people are putting much lower odds on Angron winning, only an 8% of the vote, though I guess that's a number that might please Khorne. The draw option gains a big 10%, and the Lion winning gains 5%. I guess as well as just the practicalities of 40k plot armor, another major thing that would be in the Lion's favour is that he's a big exciting model release, and this is his book. I think it would be a very unusual move to have the Lion immediately cast down and defeated as soon as he returns to the 41st millennium. It might just not make him look like a particularly serious threat. Though admittedly Vashtor did have a similar sort of experience in his own story, doing kind of well and holding his own personally against any other characters, but his overall forces and armies generally being defeated. Again, that just felt a little bit on the unfortunate side for a story that's revolving around him. Finally, not that game rules are particularly reflective of the lore, it's kind of interesting to think who's going to win the fight in terms of model versus model on the tabletop. Recently I did a big video comparing Angron to every single faction leader in Warhammer 40k that I'll link down in the video description below. It was kind of interesting to see who he beats and who he doesn't. He does seem to claim the skull of Guilliman in a one-on-one fight, though struggles a bit more against some of the other big bads of Chaos. It is a fairly convincing victory against Guilliman, who is a loyalist Primarch of similar sort of stature to the Lion. I strongly suspect that the Lion on the tabletop will be 9 wounds, strength and toughness 6 like Guilliman is, though I'd guess given the lore and backstory that he's probably going to be a better combatant, at least in close range melee. Guilliman's kind of known as the master strategist and the architect of the Codex, and the Lion's definitely known as one of the better duelists in combat out of the Primarchs, so I feel like he's probably going to be faring better. Certainly not impossible he might have some sort of special rules that help him deal with monsters or things that are far bigger than him, given his backstory as a crusading knight who purged the darkness on Caliban. It'll be interesting to do a comparison once the rules for Mr. El'Jonson are out. Barring any major surprises, I feel like a 1v1 might be kinda close on the tabletop. Perhaps the biggest thing that could ruin Angron's day would be if the Lion gets one of those strange multi-phase damage caps where you can't do more than a certain amount in a combat phase. Guilliman doesn't have that though, so the Lion might not necessarily have it himself. Anyway, hope you enjoyed a few musings on the upcoming Primarch fight. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Who will win the fight and who should win the fight, the Lion or Angron, and why? If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to keep up with 40k news and developments, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. I'll be trying to continue to keep up with the lore of the Arks of Omen series. If you want to see the developments of the Farsight book, including some rather demonic surprises, I'll leave that video linked in the video description. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's what allows me to make so many videos like this quite so regularly. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.